And thank you again. Yes?
Is there a water filter that we can use that can do anything with the atrazine?
Yeah. Here's why I hate your question. And then I'll answer. Is there a water filter that'll take out atrazine? Carbon-activated filters will take out atrazine. Brita filter even says, or it used to say, removes atrazine on the side. I don't get a dime to say that. If I had made a deal with Brita a long time ago, I'd probably be a rich man now. And I'd donate it all back to the cause, I promise you. The reasons that I like the question because you need to protect yourself. But once you do that, you're not protecting the environment. You're also accepting the responsibility that should be on the company that's contaminating us in the first place. That's why they didn't want to pay $105 million. The other thing is it doesn't solve the environmental problem. And the other thing is it doesn't solve the problem for the people who are most affected. Because those high levels in factory workers, farm workers, those are from inhalation and absorption across the skin. So even if they had access to the information and access to the resources, cleaning up the drinking water in that case would still leave them with those high levels that are, I think, very significant and worrisome. Yes?
How do we stop the bad guys?
I think there are 3 ways that you can do it. It's not going to be easy. Litigation, legislation, regulation. You got to write to your congressperson. You got to do what you're doing here tonight. Well, and I should add education. We got to get more people in here. We got to get more people who are directly impacted, who are working in, I keep hearing about the big farms and all that's going on here on all the islands. Where are the people who are directly being exposed that are working on those farms? You got to reach out to those people and get them here as well. You got to write to your legislature. You got to elect the people who are going to think about a clean environment and think about a different way forward in agriculture. You got to press the EPA. There are public comment periods when these chemicals are being reviewed, and apparently it's not even about the science. Just write in and say, I care about this and I don't want to hear. Those are all things that we can do, and we got to keep doing and pressing. But there's a huge, 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 huge amount of money in lobbyists and what, the island of Hawaii is being sued because they think they have a right to spray wherever they want to spray. You have to keep pushing and fighting those things.
We will.
We are.
I have 2 questions. One was, does Syngenta, since they're based in Switzerland, and they invented atrazine, do they make atrazine in Europe anymore?
So the question is, Syngenta's home base is in Europe. Do they make atrazine in Europe? I don't know the answer to that. For the U.S., I know the main place they make it is a plant in San Gabriel, Louisiana. I know they have plants in like Arizona and other places. I also know they have, for example, in North Carolina, research-based facilities where they're doing research and experiments, and I know that they're doing experiments here in Hawaii. So I don't think they can, my guess is no, that they're not making it there. They're making it in places where it's being used, but I don't know that for a fact. I know that the U.S. supply is being produced in the U.S., and they probably have factories around the world.
And the other question was just about the Gila cell line, since that came from a African-American woman with cervical cancer. I just wondered if that has been used in any of your studies or any of the studies.
Well, the Gila cell line is only specific to that particular. So the Gila cell line is Henrietta Lacks. It's a cell line that came from a black woman who sued to get her. Well, I don't know all the details of the story, but that cell line is particular to that particular tissue. So it can't be used in breast cancer or prostate cancer or any other kind of research. It's a particular cell line. Across the board, and that cell line is famous because it's one of the first immortalized cell lines that you could use over and over again, but it's not applicable to things like breast cancer, which are very different cell types. It's not applicable to the top 13 cancers that were shown on that slide. But thank you for bringing that up.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Hayes, for being the kind of brother that you are.
Thank you. I do what I can.
Both Germany and Australia passed laws in very recent years. In fact, Germany just last year, regarding giving parents more time to choose the sex of their child on their birth certificates, because the birth defects are so significant they can't tell what sex the kid is. And they have to make a decision about what surgeries to have. Do you think atrazine is playing into this?
Let me be clear about what's science and hard data. I wish I could tell you about the email I just got today, but somebody right now is looking at, because those birth defect papers I showed you have to do with how much contamination was in the water. They still don't know how much was in the mother. There's somebody right now measuring atrazine in pregnant mothers, and we're going to have some more direct answers. And I can't it was told to me in confidence. I probably already said too much. But those data are coming out. But there is no doubt in my mind, given the prevalence of atrazine, that atrazine is one of the chemicals that would cause a hormone imbalance that would lead to those kinds of abnormalities. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't have the hard data, but I know what atrazine does. I know experimentally what it does in other animals, and I know that as humans, genital development in terms of hormonal dependence works the same way as all other vertebrates. So there's no doubt in my mind that that's what's going to happen, but those data aren't there now, at least not for humans. They're there. I mean, my colleague in Argentina, for example, has shown that if you give alligators, he works in a caiman, if you give them atrazine, they come out with a small penis. So it's already been shown. We're working now to get the data. My point is, do we want to wait till we have all the data while we're taking these kinds of risks? And for me personally, it's not a scientific opinion, it's my personal opinion, no.
You mentioned litigation. I'm wondering, this is the second lecture I've heard now of a professor that's prognosticating birth defects that are going to be occurring. Is there such a thing as a preemptive lawsuit that will say, this is going to happen, we have no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
When it happens, you guys are taking a big hit.
I think that'd be a very interesting approach. So the idea is, can you say, we have experimental evidence that this chemical causes these kinds of birth defects, so let's stop using it before we see them in humans. And part of the problem is, for animals, right, we can treat in a couple months, get the answer. My students complain because they have to change the frog water for 6 weeks before they get the answer. But for human, you have to wait 9 months. And for, and we have to wait 4 years before we can get the adult effect on frogs. But for a human, you have to wait 40 years. And by then, you've had 40 years of exposure. So what you're proposing is an excellent idea, that you take the laboratory experiments when you have enough data and say, stop using it now so we don't have to worry about this generation later. That'd be an excellent idea. It would have stopped the problems with thalidomide. It would have stopped the problems with DES. It would have stopped the problems with DDT. But right now, I don't know of any precedent where you could do that. I would certainly support that. I would guess that the chemical industry would fight tooth and nail to stop that.
Atrazine was just like one of over 100 chemicals approved with data from industrial biotech laboratories. I think that was the original laboratory that kind of rubber stamped all the chemicals that are being used today. I was just wondering how many more scientists like you are looking at the other 100 chemicals that were being exposed?
So the question is, what do we know about these other chemicals? What do we know about the tens of thousands of other pesticides or the 80,000 synthetic chemicals that are on the market? Very little. If you look at pesticides, if you go through the academic search engines on the internet, you'll find that we know a lot about atrazine. That's the best thing about atrazine. We know that it's bad. Then you'll see some papers on glyphosate, then maybe metolachlor, and after that it just drops off. After that it just drops off. I mean, there are a few papers here and there on different chemicals, but nowhere near what we know about atrazine. And that's why, I believe, because of its prevalence and because of its potency, atrazine is the poster child. We get it moved, we use the data to get it out of here, and then we use that to press the government, to press laboratories, to do the kind of work that needs to be done to figure out what's happening with these other 80,000 chemicals. Yes, in the back.
What are you doing next with your science?
We're looking at evolution of sensitivity. We're looking at different populations are differentially sensitive. So we're trying to understand two things, how you can take frogs into the laboratory and get two completely different answers, depending on where you got your frogs from. And we're also looking at how different populations may be differently affected, if some are resistant and some are more sensitive. We're also looking at behavioral. Somebody said things you can't measure in morphology. We're actually looking at, I haven't talked about it here, but homosexuality or same-sex behavior in frogs induced by chemical exposure. And we're trying to understand the early brain development that ends up with these frogs, for example, males mating with other males preferentially instead of females. So those are just some, we're looking at a more molecular level. So I have a student in Japan right now who's trying to understand the genes that are affected by these pesticides and by hormones themselves that lead to these permanent changes. We're trying to do more work, I would like to move into more work doing examinations of cancer cell lines from minority populations and comparing that with what we already know. So there's a lot going on, a lot of it hampered by the amount of funding that we have, but we're still pushing forward.
Thinking about Salinas and how far food travels, people who aren't directly exposed to atrazine in the agricultural environment, What's the evidence of it in our food system?
Oh, there's a great deal of evidence. So pesticide action, so the evidence is when you're receiving the food, are you exposed? And for atrazine, the answer is probably no, because atrazine is a water contaminant. For other chemicals, they can be on the food or in the food. Depends on the chemical, depends on the food. And I know the organization Pesticide Action Network has a number of websites where you can look at and see the worst and best foods to eat, and whether or not you can wash the chemicals off versus whether or not it's actually in the food product itself. Yes?
Are there any test kits that people can buy to do at home or in their water,
Jeri?
There are glyphosate tests.
The question, please.
Are there any tests that people can buy and use themselves wherever they live in their water supply?
Yeah, that's something that would be really helpful. We have found through the Moms Across America, you can go to their website and purchase glyphosate tests. It's a urine test or tap water. You can do your tap water or groundwater or urine. There are some atrazine tests that are like at Home Depot. I actually haven't found them at the Home Depots in our state, but on the mainland, you probably Google it. I'm sure that, and it's a one that tests for atrazine and another zine. Turns blue. You know, folks on our island, they'll talk about in Waimea, neighbors will say, gosh, the water was extremely stinky on Friday. So one of my friends did test that, and it turned bright blue on one day when she was taking a shower, and it smelled particularly bad. So I suggest that any chance you get to observe, take pictures, or test, it's always helpful.
Yes.
First off, I want to thank you for coming here. It's just a pleasure to have men like you that are devoting their lives. We also had a man by the name of Dr. Don Huber, who's a professor emeritus and brilliant in the field of glyphosate, as you are in atrazine. The challenge that I see, it's kind of a cognitive dissonance, is that there's a lot of weeds that grow here, especially in Hawaii, because of the rainfall. And farmers, unfortunately, don't want to pull weeds, chop weeds, mow wheat. And as you said brilliantly, we can test for these things. We can find them. But it just seems like all of our government agencies, like the EPA and the USDA, and all of these entities that we can make a difference with, aren't listening much to our public opinion. And they are being discredited, as you have been. But they haven't found much on you other than the fact that you're an awesome rapper and also a great storyteller. Thank you. What do we do? I get so frustrated and so upset because these people that we bring here, that we're so fortunate to have here, especially on Hawaii Island, and make a difference with 113 going through. But our farmers, they're really still falling into this shadow of, oh, well, I'll just use a little bit of glyphosate, and if I'm not using glyphosate, as John said, I'll use another chemical that isn't as harmful. They're all harmful. Drink them.
Yeah.
I mean, and tell us that they aren't harmful. So I'm just trying to find a simple answer to a very, very complex question.
Well, one of it is, I think we have to make the distinction between big ag and farmers. We have to reach out to the farmers, because nobody who's farming, they don't want this stuff. They don't want their kids exposed either. And so we have to realize that the problem is not the farmers. The problems are when you have chemical companies owning the seed, and the farmers have to go back to these chemical companies to buy not only the seed, but also the chemical. We have to reach out, and that's why I said we should see more farmers and farm workers here. We have to reach out to those people because they're actually being harmed much more than us. I mean, to be honest, I don't worry about getting exposed to atrazine because I can take care of myself. But it's the people who are growing and the people who are working in the factories that are much more at risk. And that's the kind of, when we're talking about grassroots, that's the kind of roots that we need to build and make stronger. There should be more here of all islands that I've been on. And so we have to make those kinds of connections and make sure, because what the industry's saying, I can tell you this for a fact, I've experienced it in Minnesota, what the industry's saying is, that guy Tyrone's accusing you of killing babies. We need to let them know. We need to find ways to let them know that we're not talking about you. We're with you. We need to work and move together. And that's what happened in this lawsuit against the water companies, is that citizens stood up and said, we want it out of the water. Let's sue the water companies. Let's get the water companies to sue Syngenta to get it out. Let's get the farmers, how about that, to sue Syngenta, to sue Monsanto, to give them another option.
March, this Saturday worldwide. Locations are online. Thank you all for coming. We need to close up. Please help put things away. Aloha.